In a dense forest, a millionaire businessman takes his 7-year-old daughter on a special outing. But when they reach a steep cliff, he pretends to stumble and lets her fall into the precipice. Abandoned and injured, the child screams for help until a white horse finds her, places her on its back, and carries her to the main road, where it stops a truck in the middle of the lane. What happens next is unbelievable. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, subscribe now so you don't miss any of our moving stories. Thank you. Now, back to our story. The morning drizzle had just stopped, leaving the air heavy with the rich scent of wet earth, which mingled with the resinous aroma of the ancient pines. Sophia opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of the fever that had clung to her for weeks. But a faint smile lit up her face when she saw her father standing by her bed, dressed in casual clothes she rarely saw him wear. "Daddy!" Her voice came out raspy, thick with hope. "You're not going to work today." Edward Monroe adjusted the cuffs of his expensive shirt, avoiding his daughter's direct gaze. His fingers trembled imperceptibly as he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No, my princess. Today is a special day. We're going on that trip you wanted so badly." Sophia tried to sit up, but a fresh wave of coughing bent her over. Her small hands clutched her chest, and Edward felt something twist inside him at the sight of her suffering. For a moment, just a moment, he hesitated, but then the image of his wife, Claire, appeared in his mind, along with all her veiled threats about what would happen if this situation wasn't resolved. "Will it be fun, Daddy?" Sophia asked, her brown eyes shining with a heart-wrenching, childish trust. "You said the forest air would be good for me." "Of course it will, honey." Edward moved closer and stroked his daughter's brown hair, noticing how much thinner and more fragile it had become. "We'll see animals, maybe some pretty birds. It'll be just the two of us." While Sophia got ready, Edward paced through the empty house, his Italian leather shoes echoing on the marble floor. He'd purposefully given the housekeeper the day off, and he checked once more to make sure no one was around. His palms were sweating as he grabbed a small backpack with water and some crackers, just enough to maintain the appearance of an innocent outing. "Daddy, can I bring my doll?" Sophia appeared at the doorway, swaying slightly, clutching a worn-out rag doll that had belonged to her biological mother. "No, princess. Where we're going, she might get lost. It's better to leave her here, where she's safe." The luxury car glided silently along highways that progressively narrowed, leading away from the city and toward the mountains. Sophia had fallen asleep in the back seat, curled under a soft blanket, and Edward used the silence to try and quiet the voice in his head, screaming that this was wrong. He thought about how it had all started. The affair with Marina, the young, naive secretary, the unexpected pregnancy, the promises he had made and broken, and now, 7 years later, with Claire discovering Sophia's existence and giving him an ultimatum, either he handled the problem or she would expose his illegal business dealings to everyone. "Daddy?" Sophia's sleepy voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are we almost there?" "Almost, sweetie. We're going to stop here and walk a little. The fresh air will do wonders for your cough." Edward parked the car at an abandoned trailhead, surrounded by tall trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. The ground was a carpet of damp leaves and small twigs, and the silence was broken only by the mournful song of distant birds. He got out and opened the back door, watching as Sophia struggled to her feet. "Come on, princess. Daddy will carry you." She giggled softly, the sound echoing in the empty forest. "You're the best daddy in the world." Edward lifted her into his arms, feeling how she was far too light, too fragile. His Italian shoes sank into the mud as he carried her deeper into the woods, following a path he had scouted days before. With every step, he moved further from the car, further from civilization, further from any chance of turning back. "Daddy, look, a butterfly." Sophia pointed to a blue butterfly dancing between the trees. "Yes, sweetie." It's very pretty. His voice was automatic, distant. They walked for nearly an hour until Edward saw what he was looking for up ahead, a steep ravine covered in dense vegetation with loose rocks and a treacherous drop. The bottom of the cliff was hidden by the morning fog, but he knew it was deep enough. "Daddy, I'm tired. Can we rest?" Edward stopped at the edge of the ravine, his heart pounding. His hands shook as he looked down at his daughter, who was watching him with unconditional love in her eyes. "Of course, Princess. We'll rest right here." Edward carefully set Sophia on the ground, his hands trembling as she leaned against his legs. The little girl looked around, admiring the tall trees and lush greenery that surrounded them. The sound of running water somewhere in the distance mixed with the bird song, creating a natural symphony that should have been comforting, but only intensified the terror growing in his chest. "It's so pretty here, Daddy," Sophia smiled, her eyes bright despite her pallor. "It looks like a place from a fairy tale." "Yes, it's very pretty." Edward glanced at the ravine before him, calculating the distance. He wiped his sweaty palms discreetly on his pants. "Sophia, want to see something interesting? There's an amazing view just over there." The girl nodded enthusiastically, completely trusting her father's words. Edward took her by the hand, guiding her toward the edge of the precipice. With each step, he felt as if he were walking into his own personal hell, but Claire's voice echoed in his mind. "Either you handle this, or I tell the police everything about your business." "Daddy, I can't see anything because of the fog," Sophia said, craning her neck to try and see the bottom of the ravine. "Hold on. I'll show you." Edward positioned himself behind her, his large hands resting on her fragile shoulders. For a moment, he was paralyzed, looking at her brown hair dancing in the light breeze. She was so small, so trusting. "Daddy?" Sophia turned her head to look at him, noticing something strange in his expression. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Princess." Edward forced a smile, but his hands remained tense on her shoulders. "Look there." "Can you see that big rock?" Sophia leaned forward slightly, trying to peer through the fog. "I think so, Daddy. Is that it? Over?" Edward pretended to stumble, shoving the girl forward with just enough force to make her lose her balance. Sophia's scream ripped through the forest air as she fell, tumbling down the steep slope. The sound of her small body hitting rocks and branches echoed down the ravine, followed by a terrible silence. Edward stood at the edge of the cliff, panting, his hands shaking violently. He waited for a few minutes, listening for any sound, any sign. When the silence stretched on, he allowed himself to believe it was over. Quickly, he backed away from the edge and began the walk back to the car. Far below, at the bottom of the ravine, Sophia lay among the damp leaves and broken twigs. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her whole body ached. Slowly, consciousness returned, and she tried to move, letting out a low moan of pain. "Daddy!" Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Daddy, where are you?" She tried to stand, but her legs trembled and wouldn't support her. The pain in her ribs was intense, and each breath felt like a monumental effort. Gradually, she managed to sit up, looking around at the place where she had landed. "Daddy!" This time, her cry was louder, desperate. "Daddy, I'm down here." The echo of her voice died among the trees, unanswered. Sophia began to cry, not understanding what had happened. She remembered looking down, and then everything had gone dark. "Daddy, I'm hurt," she cried out again, her tears mixing with the blood on her face. "Please come get me." But only the silence of the forest answered her pleas. High above, Edward had reached his car. His hands were shaking so badly it took him a moment to get the door open. Once inside, he sat for several minutes, trying to control his breathing. It was done. There was no going back. He started the car and began to drive back to the city, the words he would say already forming in his mind. An accident. She had tripped and fallen. He had tried to save her, but he couldn't. The story was clear, simple. No one would question a grieving father. In the ravine, Sophia finally managed to pull herself up. Leaning against a small tree, her knees were bleeding and she felt constantly dizzy. But the determination of a child who needed to find her father was stronger than the pain. "Daddy wouldn't leave me here," she muttered to herself, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "He must have gone to get help." Sophia began trying to climb the steep slope, but her strength, limited by her illness and injuries, kept her from getting more than a few feet up. Each attempt ended with her sliding back down, injuring herself further. "Daddy! Daddy!" Her desperate cries echoed through the forest, a heartbreaking symphony of despair that would have moved any living creature to hear it. She kept screaming until her voice grew hoarse, until her strength completely failed her. Then, exhausted and confused, she curled up against a large rock, shivering with cold and fear. Night was falling, and Sophia had never been alone in the dark before. The first night was the longest of Sophia's life. Huddled against the cold stone, she alternated between desperate calls for her father and moments of silent weeping. The sounds of the nocturnal forest, the hooting of owls, the rustling of small animals in the leaves, the wind whispering through the trees created a mysterious symphony that both terrified and fascinated her. When the first rays of sun managed to pierce the dense canopy, Sophia tried again to climb the slope. Her small fingers clung to exposed roots and loose rocks, but with every attempt she slid back down. The fever had returned during the night, and chills racked her entire body. "Daddy must be looking for me," she murmured to herself, trying to keep hope alive. "He wouldn't leave me here all alone." The second day brought more challenges. Sophia discovered a small stream running at the bottom of the ravine, and she was able to drink water and wash the blood from her face. But hunger began to gnaw at her, and she didn't know which berries or plants she could eat without poisoning herself. It was on the afternoon of the third day that she first heard it, the sound of hooves striking against stone. Sophia lifted her head, trying to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. Through the dense vegetation, she glimpsed a flash of white moving between the trees. "Is someone there?" she called out, her voice weaker now after days of screaming. "Please, help me." The sound of hooves stopped. Sophia held her breath, waiting. Then, slowly, through the curtain of leaves and branches, emerged the most beautiful creature she had ever seen. It was a white horse, majestic and powerful, with a mane that seemed to have been touched by snow. Its eyes were dark and intelligent, and it watched her with a curiosity that seemed almost human. The animal carefully made its way down the slope, its movements calculated and sure, as if it knew every rock and root in this terrain. "Hi, pretty boy," Sophia whispered, trying to move closer without startling him. "Can you help me?" The horse stopped a few feet away, studying her intently. Sophia could see he was wild. There were no horseshoes, no sign of domestication. But there was something in his eyes that calmed her, a gentleness that made her feel safe for the first time since the fall. "My name is Sophia," she said, slowly extending a hand. "I'm lost. My daddy left." The horse moved closer, lowering its muzzle to sniff her hand. Sophia let out a small laugh, a sound she hadn't made in days. She stroked the animal's soft coat, feeling an immediate connection with this being who had appeared in her moment of greatest despair. "You're so beautiful," she murmured, her tears dampening the white fur. "I was so scared." The horse allowed her to come closer, and Sophia wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the animal's warmth against her cold skin. For a few minutes, they stood like that, a wounded little girl and a wild horse, united by the universal language of need and compassion. Then, something extraordinary happened. The horse began to move toward a less steep part of the ravine, looking back as if wanting her to follow. Sophia tried to walk, but her legs were still weak, and she stumbled. The horse stopped immediately, returning to her side. He lowered himself slightly, in a posture that seemed like an invitation. Sophia looked at him in astonishment. "You want me to get on?" she asked, hardly believing what she was seeing. The horse remained in position, waiting patiently. Sophia, gathering all her strength, managed to lean against him and pull herself up. Her small legs could barely hold on, but the animal stood perfectly still until she was secure. "Thank you," she whispered, stroking his silky mane. "Thank you for helping me." The horse began to climb the slope, its movements careful and calculated. With each step, Sophia held on tighter. Amazed at the animal's intelligence and kindness, he seemed to know exactly where to step, which rocks to avoid, as if the entire forest were his known territory. The climb was slow but steady. When they finally reached the top, Sophia saw the trailhead again where she had walked with her father, but now, mounted on the white horse, she had a different perspective. The animal stopped and looked around, as if deciding which way to go. "And do you know where the road is?" Sophia asked, patting the horse's neck. "I need to find someone who can help me get home." The horse nickered softly, almost as if answering. Then, with a determination that defied all animal logic, he began to walk through the forest toward a destination only he knew. Sophia clung to his mane, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. She didn't know where they were going, but for the first time since the fall, she wasn't alone. The white horse had appeared like a guardian angel, and she trusted him completely. The forest seemed different from atop the horse, less frightening, more magical. And as they walked, Sophia began to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The horse walked with a steady gait through the forest, following trails that seemed invisible to human eyes. Sophia held on to the white mane, amazed at the animal's ability to navigate through dense trees and natural obstacles, as if he possessed an internal map of the area. They had been walking for hours when Sophia began to hear a distant, familiar sound, the roar of heavy engines. Her heart leaped with hope. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to the horse. "It's cars! There's a road nearby." The horse seemed to quicken his pace, as if he too had heard the sounds of civilization. Through the thinning vegetation, Sophia could glimpse flashes of asphalt between the trees. The main highway connecting the region's towns was there, so close she could almost touch it. When they finally emerged from the forest, Sophia saw the road stretching before them like a grey ribbon cutting through the rural landscape. Semi-trucks passed regularly, hauling cargo between cities, and a few smaller cars also traveled the route. The horse stopped at the edge of the road, and Sophia felt her breath quicken. "Now what?" she asked, looking at the fast-moving vehicles. "How do we stop someone?" As if he had heard her question, the horse made a decision that defied all animal logic. He positioned himself strategically in the middle of the lane, right in the center of the road. Sophia cried out in alarm, trying to get him to move. "No, it's dangerous! Get off the road!" But the horse stood firm, and when he saw a large truck approaching around a bend, he reared up on his hind legs and let out a loud, powerful whinny that echoed across the landscape. The sound was impossible to ignore, a desperate call for help that split the morning air. The truck driver, a seasoned trucker named Robert and Bob Evans, slammed on his brakes when he saw the surreal scene before him. A white horse in the middle of the road, rearing up, with a small child on its back. He brought his rig to a halt just a few feet from the animal, his heart pounding. Bob climbed down from the cab slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. He had lost his own daughter in an accident years ago, and the sight of this fragile little girl on the wild horse touched something deep within his soul. "Easy now, little one," he said softly, approaching slowly. "No one's gonna hurt you." Sophia looked at the man with wide eyes. He was large and bearded, in simple work clothes, but there was a kindness in his voice that calmed her. "Please," she said, her voice faint, "I need help. I'm lost." "How'd you get out here, kid?" Bob asked, noticing the cuts on her face and her worrisome pallor. "Where are your parents?" My daddy left." Sophia began to cry again. "I fell in a big hole, and he didn't come back for me. This horse saved me." Bob's brow furrowed. his initial wariness growing. A child alone in the forest, on a wild horse with visible injuries. The whole situation felt strange, potentially dangerous. He'd heard stories of highway robberies and traps. "Your dad just left you?" he asked carefully, keeping his distance. "How did that happen?" Sophia tried to explain, but her words were jumbled, mixed with sobs. "We went for a walk in the woods. He said the air would be good for me. I was sick. Then I fell. And when I woke up, he was gone." The horse, as if sensing the man's hesitation, slowly approached Bob. The animal looked him directly in the eye, and Bob would later swear he saw a silent plea in that gaze, as if the horse were asking him to trust them and help the girl. "I'm not going to hurt you," Bob said finally, holding out his arms. "But you need to get down from there. You're hurt." Sophia looked at the horse, who lowered his head as if giving permission. She slid down slowly, and Bob caught her in his arms just as her legs gave out. The girl was weaker than she looked, and the fever had returned. "My God, you're burning up," Bob murmured, carrying her toward the truck's cab. "I need to get you to a hospital." "No!" Sophia clung to his shirt. "What about the horse? He saved me. I can't leave him." Bob looked at the white animal, who was watching them intently. "He's wild, kid. I can't take him with me." "Please," Sophia begged, her tears soaking the trucker's shirt. "He's my friend. Without him, I would have died alone in that hole." Bob sighed, looking again at the horse. The animal walked up to the truck and stood there, as if he knew he wouldn't be abandoned. There was something supernatural about this whole situation, something that defied logic. "All right," he said finally. "We'll figure something out." He settled Sophia on the passenger seat, gave her some water and a few crackers he had stashed away. As she drank slowly, Bob watched the horse, who had positioned himself beside the truck like a silent guardian. "What's your name?" Bob asked gently. "Sophia," she answered, her voice a little stronger after the water. "What's yours?" "Bob. And don't you worry, Sophia. We're going to figure out what happened to you." But even as he spoke reassuring words, Bob felt a growing unease. The girl's story didn't add up, and he couldn't ignore the possibility that he was getting involved in something dangerous. Bob drove slowly along the country roads, constantly checking his side mirror to see if the white horse was still following. The animal trotted alongside the truck, always staying close, as if understanding the importance of not being separated from Sophia. "He's really following us," Bob muttered, impressed. "Never seen anything like it." Sophia was leaning back in the seat, her breathing calmer after some water and a few crackers. But Bob noticed how she flinched whenever he asked questions about what had happened. Her answers were fragmented, as if she herself didn't fully understand what had occurred. "Sophia," he said gently, "do you remember your dad's full name, or where you live?" The girl was quiet for a long moment. "Edward," she said finally. "Daddy Edward. But I don't always live with him. Sometimes I stay with my Aunt Marina." Bob frowned. The situation was getting more confusing. "And your mum? Where is she?" "Daddy said Mommy went to heaven when I was a baby," Sophia replied, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "He said that's why I have to be a very good girl, so I don't cause any trouble." As they talked, Bob decided to take her to his small farm instead of going straight into town. Something about this story was off, and he needed to understand the situation better before involving the authorities. Besides, the girl was clearly traumatized and needed immediate care. "We're going to my place first," he said. "You need to rest, and I need to clean up those cuts." Bob's property was simple but welcoming, a small house surrounded by a large plot of land where he raised a few chickens and kept a small vegetable garden. When they arrived, the white horse immediately went to the animal trough and drank deeply, showing signs of fatigue from the long journey. Bob carried Sophia inside and settled her on the living room sofa. He gently cleaned her wounds with warm water and applied bandages, noticing how small and frail she was for a 7-year-old. "Are you hungry?" he asked, watching her take in her surroundings with large, curious eyes. "A little," she admitted shyly. As Bob prepared a simple soup in the kitchen, he reflected on the situation. He had raised his own daughter alone for years before the accident that took her, and his paternal instincts were screaming that something was very wrong with Sophia's story. "Bob," the girl's voice called from the living room, "is the horse gonna be okay out there?" "He'll be fine, don't you worry." Bob returned with the warm soup. He seems to know how to take care of himself. While Sophia ate slowly, Bob turned on the local news radio. He expected to hear a report about a missing child, but there was nothing. This made him even more suspicious. "Sophia," he said, sitting in a nearby chair, "Can you tell me exactly what happened when you fell? Try to remember every detail." The girl stopped eating, her hands trembling slightly. "Daddy said we were going to see a pretty view. He took me to the edge of a high place, and then—" She trailed off, tears beginning to fall. "Then I fell, I don't know how. When I woke up, he was gone." "And you were alone for how long?" 3 days, Sophia whispered. "I yelled a lot, but no one came. Until the horse showed up." A chill went down Bob's spine. 3 days. A frantic father would have had the state police, search parties, helicopters out looking. It would have been all over the news, but there was nothing. "Are you sure it was an accident?" he asked carefully. Sophia looked at him with confused eyes. "What do you mean?" "Nothing, honey. Just trying to understand." Bob got up and went to the window to watch the white horse, who was grazing peacefully in the yard. "Do you know your dad's last name, or where he works?" "Monroe," Sophia said. "Edward Monroe. He has a big office in the city with lots of people working for him." Bob knew that name. Edward Monroe was a well-known businessman in the region, the owner of several companies, a rich and influential man. This made the situation even stranger. Why hadn't a man with such resources launched a massive search for his daughter? As night fell, Bob helped Sophia take a warm bath and gave her a clean t-shirt that had belonged to his daughter. The girl was exhausted, and he tucked her into the guest room bed. "Bob!" she called as he was leaving the room. "Yeah, thank you for helping me and for letting the horse stay." "You're welcome, little one. Now get some sleep." But Bob couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch, watching the white horse, who had lain down near the window of the room where Sophia slept, like a silent guardian. The animal had saved a child, guided her to safety, and now refused to leave her side. There was something supernatural about their connection, something Bob couldn't explain, and the more he thought about Sophia's story, the more convinced he became that this had been no accidental fall. The next morning, his life would change forever, because Edward Monroe was about to discover that his daughter had survived. The morning came with the crowing of roosters and the soft nicker of the white horse near the window. Sophia woke up slowly, forgetting for a moment where she was. When she saw the unfamiliar room, fear returned, but then she heard Bob's gentle voice in the kitchen and remembered she was safe. Bob had been up all night, thinking. By morning, he had made a decision. He needed to investigate Edward Monroe further before taking any action. There was something deeply wrong with this story, and he couldn't just hand Sophia over to the authorities without understanding what had really happened. "Morning, little one," he said as Sophia appeared in the kitchen, still wearing the oversized t-shirt that served as a dress. "How'd you sleep?" "Good," Sophia replied, looking out the window to see the horse. "Did he stay there all night?" "He sure did. Seems like he's decided you're his responsibility now." After a simple breakfast, Bob said he needed to go into town to run some errands. He didn't mention that he planned to discreetly ask around about Edward Monroe and search for news of a missing child. "You can stay here with the horse," he said, "but don't leave the property, okay?" Sophia agreed, and Bob left with a heavy heart. On the drive to town, he couldn't shake the image of the little girl, so small and vulnerable, yet with an inner strength that had kept her alive for 3 days alone in the forest. In town, Bob first went to the local sheriff's office, but discreetly. He spoke to an acquaintance who worked there and asked if there were any recent missing child reports. "Nope, nothing," the deputy replied. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Bob lied. "Heard some talk." Next, he went to the public library and searched the local papers from the past few weeks. Nothing, not a single story about Edward Monroe looking for a missing daughter. This confirmed his darkest suspicions. Bob then drove to the city's business district, where Edward Monroe's offices were located. He parked across the street and watched the building. He saw Edward arrive in his luxury car, impeccably dressed, showing no sign of the grief or worry of a father who had lost his child. While Bob was investigating, a new development was unfolding. Edward had hired a private investigator to discreetly find any trace of Sophia, not because he cared, but because he needed to be certain the problem had been permanently solved. The investigator, an experienced PI named Mark Sullivan, had started asking questions in the region near the forest. He learned that a trucker had stopped on the main highway 3 days earlier, apparently to help someone. Local witnesses mentioned seeing a stopped truck and a white horse. When Mark reported this to Edward, the businessman's blood ran cold. "A white horse," he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, sir. It seems a child was involved. I'm trying to identify the truck driver." Edward hung up the phone, his hands shaking. Sophia was alive, somehow. Impossibly, she had survived and found help. His entire carefully constructed life was at risk once again. Meanwhile, on Bob's farm, Sophia was playing in the yard with the white horse. She had found an old brush and was grooming the animal's coat, talking to him as if he were a lifelong friend. "You know what really happened, don't you?" she murmured, running the brush through his silky mane. "You know Daddy left me there on purpose." The horse turned his head to look at her, his dark eyes full of understanding. Sophia hugged his neck, finally allowing herself to admit what her heart already knew. "He doesn't want to be my daddy anymore," she whispered, her tears soaking the white fur. "But you want to be my friend, don't you?" The horse nickered softly, as if confirming his undying loyalty. When Bob returned from town, he found Sophia sitting under a tree, reading a children's book she had found in the house, while the horse grazed nearby. The scene was so peaceful that for a moment he forgot the gravity of the situation. "How was your day?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "It was good. The horse and I talked a lot." "Oh yeah? And what did you talk about?" Sophia looked at him with her big, serious eyes. "About the truth. Bob, my dad didn't lose me by accident, did he?" The direct question caught Bob off guard. He looked at this 7-year-old child, seeing a maturity in her eyes that shouldn't have been there. "Why do you think that, Sophia?" "Because if he lost me, he'd be looking for me. And you went to town today to look for news about me, but you didn't find any, did you?" Bob sighed deeply. There was no point in lying to her. "No, little one, I didn't find anything." Sophia nodded, as if she already knew. "The horse saved me because he knew no one else was coming." In that moment, Bob made a decision that would change all their lives. He would not turn Sophia over to the authorities, not until he fully understood what had happened and could ensure she would be truly safe. "Sophia," he said, "would you like to stay here for a while longer, until we figure out the best thing to do?" She smiled for the first time since he'd found her. "Can I?" "And can the horse stay too?" "Of course you can." But Bob didn't know that at that very moment, Edward was mobilizing resources to find them, and the quiet life they had begun to build was about to be threatened. A week had passed since Sophia arrived at Bob's farm. The simple routine of country life had brought color back to her cheeks, and her cough had improved significantly in the fresh air with his gentle care. The white horse, whom she had named Angel, rarely left her side. Bob was in the yard mending a fence when he heard the sound of a car approaching on the dirt road. He straightened up, a sense of danger running down his spine. Cars rarely came out to his isolated property. The investigator, Mark Sullivan, got out of a black sedan, accompanied by 2 men who were clearly not police officers. Bob immediately knew this was not an official visit. There was something sinister in their posture. Good afternoon, Mark said, flashing an ID. Private investigator. We're looking for a missing child. We received a tip that a local trucker might have some information. Bob remained calm, but his heart was racing. A missing child. I haven't heard anything about that on the news. It's a delicate case, Mark replied, his eyes scanning the property. The family prefers to keep it quiet. You haven't seen anything unusual lately. A little girl. Maybe. Just then, Sophia appeared on the porch, drawn by the voices. When she saw the strange men, her eyes widened in terror. She recognized one of them. He was someone she had seen at her father's office. "Bob!" she screamed, running toward him. Mark smiled coldly. "Looks like we found what we were looking for." Bob instinctively moved to stand between Sophia and the men. "Hold on! Who are you people exactly? And why is this child so afraid of you? We're representing the family," Mark said, stepping forward. "The girl was kidnapped and we're taking her back home." "No!" Sophia clung to Bob's legs. "They're lying. Bob, please, don't let them take me." That's when the white horse appeared. Angel had been grazing behind the house, but some instinct had alerted him to the danger. He galloped over, positioning himself aggressively between the strangers and Sophia. His nostrils flared and his eyes blazing with a protective fury Bob had never seen in an animal. "My God," one of the thugs muttered. "It's the same horse from the forest." Mark shot him a sharp look, but Bob had heard the comment. "What forest? What are you talking about?" "None of your business," Mark snapped. "Hand over the girl, and there won't be any trouble." Bob looked at Sophia, seeing the absolute terror in her eyes. In that moment, he made the bravest decision of his life. "I'm not handing anyone over without an official court order. Get off my property." The thugs moved forward, but the horse whinnied loudly and reared up, its front hooves lashing through the air, dangerously close to the men. The animal's show of force made them back away. "This isn't over," Mark threatened. "You don't know who you're messing with, and you don't know who you're messing with," Bob replied, his voice steady despite his fear. "This is my property, and you're trespassing." After the men left, Bob knelt beside Sophia, who was trembling violently. "Sophia, you need to tell me the truth, everything. Why are you so scared of them?" "Because they work for Daddy," she whispered. "Bob, I think Daddy tried to hurt me on purpose." Bob felt the world spin. "What do you mean?" "He took me to that high place, and when I was looking down, he pushed me. I felt his hands on my back. Tears streamed down Sophia's face. He wanted me to die." The revelation hit Bob like a punch to the gut. It all made sense now. The lack of an official search, the absence of news, the private investigators instead of the police. "Why would he do that?" Bob asked, his voice hoarse with shock. "I heard him fighting with someone on the phone, a woman. She said I was a problem that needed to be solved." Sophia clung to the horse, who had lowered his head to comfort her. Angel knew. "That's why he saved me." Bob looked at the white horse, seeing an almost human intelligence in its eyes. It was as if the animal understood exactly what was happening and had taken on the role of protector. "Sophia, is there anyone else in your family, someone who cares about you?" "Aunt Marina," she said shyly, "but Daddy said she went far away." Bob had a suspicion Marina hadn't left voluntarily. "What's her full name?" "Marina Santos. She once said she's my real mom, but Daddy got really mad when she said that." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Edward had lied about Sophia's mother being dead. She was alive, and likely being kept from her daughter against her will. "Bob," Sophia asked in a small voice, "are you going to let them take me?" Bob looked at this brave child who had survived an attempted murder and 3 days alone in the forest. He thought of his own daughter, whom he had lost so tragically, and felt an iron determination grow in his chest. "Never," he said firmly. "We're going to fight. You, me, and Angel. We're going to find the truth and make sure you're safe." Sophia smiled through her tears, and the horse nickered softly, as if agreeing to the plan. But Bob knew the war was just beginning. Edward Munro was a powerful and dangerous man, and he would not give up easily. That night, Bob barely slept. He had locked all the doors and windows, and the horse, Angel, remained vigilant in the yard like a silent sentinel. Sophia slept fitfully in her room, muttering incoherent words during nightmares that haunted her. In the morning, Bob made a risky decision. He had to find Marina Santos, Sophia's biological mother. If she truly cared for her daughter, she might be able to help expose the truth about Edward Munro. "Sophia," he said at breakfast, "do you remember where your Aunt Marina lived, or where she worked?" Sophia thought for a moment, stirring her oatmeal distractedly. "She worked at a clothing store downtown, a store named after a flower. Rose, Daisy, Violet," Bob suggested. "That's it. The Violet Boutique." Sophia smiled. She always smelled like flower perfume. Bob decided he would go to town again, but this time he would leave Sophia with Mrs. Gable, an elderly neighbor who lived a few miles away. It was safer than leaving her alone, even with the horse's protection. "Are you going to find Aunt Marina?" Sophia asked hopefully when Bob explained the plan. "I'm going to try, little one. But you need to stay hidden with Mrs. Gable until I get back, okay?" When Bob arrived at the Violet Boutique downtown, his heart sank. The store was closed, with a "For Lease" sign in the window. He asked the neighboring shopkeepers about Marina, but the answers were vague and contradictory. "She left suddenly," one merchant said, "about 3 months ago. No one knows where she went. Heard she had trouble with an ex-boyfriend," another commented, "some rich guy who was threatening her." Bob felt he was on the right track. He decided to search for Marina in the county records, trying to find a current address. It was a long and frustrating search, but he finally got a lead. Marina had recently registered in a small town 2 hours away. While Bob was investigating, Edward was implementing his own plan. He had spread the story that Sophia had been kidnapped by a dangerous man, using his influence to convince local authorities. Posters with Bob's photo and a description of Sophia as a kidnapping victim began appearing around the region. "It's crucial we act quickly," Edward told the local sheriff during a meeting in his office. "My daughter is in danger in this man's hands." The sheriff, impressed by Edward's wealth and influence, promised to mobilize all available resources. "Don't you worry, Mr. Munro. We'll find your daughter." Meanwhile, Bob was driving the country roads toward the town where Marina was supposedly living. He had left Sophia safely hidden with Mrs. Gable, and the horse, Angel, had insisted on staying nearby, as if understanding the continued danger. The town was small and quiet, a world away from the urban environment where Marina had once worked. Bob found the address from the records, a small rental house on a simple residential street. When he knocked on the door, a thin young woman answered. Bob immediately recognized Sophia's features in her face, the same brown eyes, the same delicate bone structure. "Marina Santos?" he asked. The woman was instantly on alert, her eyes scanning the street behind Bob. "Who's asking?" "My name is Bob. I have information about your daughter, Sophia." Marina's face went pale, and she gripped the doorframe for support. "Sophia? What happened to her?" Edward said. "He said she was sick and in a private hospital." "Can I come in? It's better if we talk privately." Marina led him into the small, modestly furnished house. Bob could see she was living on limited means, a stark contrast to the lifestyle she likely had when she was with Edward. "Marina," Bob began gently, "Sophia isn't in a hospital. She's with me, and she's safe. But there are things you need to know." Over the next hour, Bob told her the entire story, from finding Sophia on the road to the threatening visit from Edward's thugs. Marina listened in silence, tears streaming freely as the truth was revealed. I knew it," she whispered finally. "I knew he was capable of something like this. That's why he threatened me, forced me out of town. He said if I ever tried to see Sophia again, she would get hurt." Why didn't you go to the police? Marina laughed bitterly. You don't understand the power Edward has. He has cops, judges, politicians on his payroll. Who would believe a former waitress over a millionaire businessman? But we have evidence now, Bob said. Sophia remembers what happened. She knows it wasn't an accident. The testimony of a 7-year-old child against Edward Monroe. Marina shook her head. It won't be enough. So what do you suggest? Marina was silent for a long moment, staring at a small photo of Sophia she kept on the table. I have some things, recordings of phone calls where he threatened me, documents he forced me to sign, waiving my rights to Sophia. A spark of hope ignited in Bob. Could that be enough? It could be a start, but Bob, Marina looked him directly in the eye. If we're going to do this, we have to be prepared for a war. Edward won't go down easy, and he'll use every resource he has. I'm ready, Bob said firmly. Your daughter almost died, Marina. She deserves justice. Marina nodded, a new determination shining in her eyes. Then we'll fight. But first, I need to see my daughter. I need to hold her and tell her I'm sorry I couldn't protect her. As Bob and Marina planned their next move, they were unaware that Edward had discovered the location of Bob's farm and was preparing his final assault. The reunion between Marina and Sophia was a moment Bob would never forget. When they arrived at Mrs. Gable's house late that afternoon, Sophia was in the yard with Angel, who had steadfastly refused to be separated from her. "Mommy," Sophia whispered when she saw Marina getting out of the truck, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Marina ran toward her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "My princess, my little princess." They embraced in the middle of the yard, and even the horse, Angel, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, approaching calmly and resting his great head on both their shoulders, as if blessing the reunion. "I thought you were gone forever," Sophia cried, clinging to her mother's neck. "Daddy said you didn't want me anymore." "Never, my love, never. I've always wanted you, always fought for you," Marina whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "Forgive me for not being able to protect you." Bob watched the scene, moved but also worried. Mrs. Gable had told him that strangers had been through the area asking questions, and he knew they didn't have much time before Edward found them. "Marina," he said gently, "we need to talk about our next steps." That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, exhausted, in her mother's arms, Marina showed Bob the evidence she had secretly kept. There were audio recordings of phone calls where Edward clearly threatened her, forged documents she'd been forced to sign, and even photos of bruises he had given her during violent arguments. "He would hit me whenever I brought up Sophia," Marina explained, her voice trembling with rage and grief. "He said she was a mistake that needed to be corrected. So why did you keep all this?" Bob asked. "Because a part of me always knew that one day I would have to fight for her. I just never imagined that." Marina couldn't finish the sentence, the reality of the attempted murder still too difficult to accept. Bob turned on the radio quietly to the local news, and his blood ran cold when he heard the report. "Police are intensifying their search for the kidnapper of 7-year-old Sophia Monroe. Businessman Edward Monroe is offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the criminal, Robert Bob Evans, and the safe return of his daughter." Marina looked at Bob in horror. "He did it. He's using the media against us." "This complicates things," Bob admitted. "But it doesn't change what we have to do." It was then that they heard the sound they all dreaded, cars approaching on the dirt road. Angel, who had been grazing peacefully, shot his head up and began to whinny agitatedly. "They've found us," Marina whispered. Bob acted quickly. "Mrs. Gable, do you have a place to hide?" The elderly woman, who had insisted on staying to help, pointed to a small cellar under the house. "Down there." "Take the girl." Bob scooped up Sophia, who had woken at the sound of the cars, and carried her down into the cellar with Marina. "Stay quiet, princess," he whispered. "It's just a game of hide and seek." When Bob came back up, He saw through the window that it wasn't just Edward's thugs, there were police cars as well. Edward had successfully convinced the authorities that Bob was a kidnapper. "Robert Evans!" An amplified voice boomed across the yard. "You are surrounded. Release the child and surrender." Bob looked out the window and saw Edward standing beside the police officers, a look of false concern on his face. But Bob could see the cold satisfaction in his eyes. Outside, the horse Angel began to behave strangely. The animal ran toward the group of men, but instead of being aggressive, he began to do something extraordinary. Angel positioned himself between the officers and the house and started making movements that seemed to be an attempt to communicate. The horse would gesture with his head toward Edward, then back away and rear up, as if trying to warn them of a danger. His behavior was so unusual that even the officers paused to watch. "What the hell is with that animal?" one of the officers muttered. Edward, realizing the horse was drawing unwanted attention to him, made an impatient gesture. "It's just a wild horse. Ignore it and get the kidnapper." But Angel didn't stop. The animal continued his warning display, and some of the officers began to exchange confused glances. There was something uncanny about the intelligence the horse was showing, as if he were trying to tell a story that couldn't be spoken. Bob realized this was the moment of truth. He opened the door of the house and stepped out with his hands raised. "I surrender," he said loudly, "but before you take me, there's something you need to hear." "Don't listen to him," Edward shouted. "He's a dangerous liar." "Then why are you so afraid to let me speak?" Bob asked, looking directly at Edward. At that moment, Angel did something that left everyone stunned. The animal approached Edward and, instead of being aggressive, began to sniff insistently at his clothes, then backed away and let out a long, high-pitched whinny that sounded like a lament. It was as if the horse were identifying the scent of betrayal, the scent of the man who had abandoned an innocent child to die in the forest. The tension in the air was palpable, and Bob knew it was time to play his last card. "Sergeant," Bob said, addressing the officer who seemed to be in charge, "this man isn't who he appears to be. His daughter wasn't kidnapped. She was left for dead in the forest." "Lies," Edward shouted, but there was a growing tremor in his voice. "This man is desperate. He'll say anything." Sergeant Miller, an experienced officer with over 20 years on the force, watched the situation unfold with a careful eye. There was something about Bob's calm demeanor that didn't fit the profile of a desperate kidnapper, and the horse's behavior was indeed bizarre. The animal truly seemed to be trying to communicate something specific about Edward. "Mr. Evans," the sergeant said, "if you have something to say, now is the time." "The child is here, yes," Bob admitted, "but she wasn't kidnapped. I found her on the road, injured and abandoned, being carried by this horse who saved her from dying alone in the woods." "Where is she now?" the sergeant asked. "She's safe, and she's with her biological mother, who this man threatened and forced away from her own child." Edward laughed nervously. "Biological mother?" "Sophia's mother died in childbirth. The man is clearly delusional." Just then, Marina emerged from the house, carrying Sophia in her arms. The moment Sophia saw Edward, she clung to her mother's neck and began to cry. "No, Mommy, don't let him take me. He hurt me." Sophia's reaction was so genuine and terrified that several officers exchanged uneasy glances. Edward tried to step forward, but Angel immediately moved between him and the girl. His nostrils flared in a clear, menacing posture. "Sophia, sweetie, Daddy's here to take you home," Edward said in a forced, sweet tone, but even he could hear how false it sounded. "You're not my daddy," Sophia screamed, her words echoing across the silent yard. "Real daddies don't push their daughters off of high places." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward felt every gaze turn to him, and for the first time his mask of the concerned father began to crack. "She's confused, traumatized," he stammered. You can't take the word of a child who spent days in the hands of a kidnapper." "Mr. Monroe," Sergeant Miller said slowly, Why is there no official record of a search for your daughter? Why wasn't an Amber Alert issued, the standard protocol for a missing child? Edward hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for his guilt to become visible. I wanted to maintain discretion, to protect the family. Marina took a step forward, her voice firm despite her fear. Sergeant, I have evidence that this man threatened me, forced me to sign away my rights to my daughter, and tried to murder her when he found out she was a complication for his marriage. She pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket. I have recordings of phone calls right here where he makes his intentions perfectly clear. Edward went pale. That's a fake. She's making all of this up. Then you wouldn't mind if we had a listen, would you? The sergeant asked. Marina pressed play, and Edward's unmistakable voice echoed in the night air. Marina, you're going to sign those papers and disappear from our lives. If you try to see Sophia again, I guarantee she will get hurt, and you know I have the resources to make it look like an accident. Several officers looked at each other, and Edward realized he was losing control. That was taken out of context. She's twisting. And this... Marina held up photographs of bruises on her arms and face. Is there context for this too? As the evidence mounted, Angel did something extraordinary. The horse walked over to Sophia and gently nuzzled her hand. Then he walked to the exact spot where Edward had parked his car during his first visit to the farm, sniffed the ground, and returned to Sophia, nickering softly. Angel remembers his smell, Sophia said through her tears. He remembers when that bad man came here before. Sergeant Miller was beginning to see a very different pattern from the one he had been presented with. Mr. Monroe, can you explain why you were on this property previously? I've never been here before, Edward lied desperately. But Mrs. Gable, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. I saw his car, an expensive black car with tinted windows. It stopped on the road, and some men got out to ask questions about Bob. Mr. Monroe, the sergeant said, his voice now official and cold. I think we need to continue this conversation down at the station and have a forensics expert examine this evidence. Edward looked around, watching his carefully constructed story crumble. But he was a powerful man with connections, expensive lawyers. He could still turn this around. Sergeant, I trust you understand you are dealing with very serious accusations against a respectable citizen. My lawyers will want a detailed explanation for this treatment. And they'll get one, the sergeant replied, just as the justice system will get a detailed explanation of what really happened to this child. As Edward was led to the police car, he looked one last time at Sophia. For a moment, just for a moment, Bob saw something that could have been genuine remorse in the man's eyes, but then Edward looked away, and Bob knew the fight was far from over. In the days following Edward's temporary arrest, the story began to spread through the rural community like wildfire. The local people, initially wary of Bob, started to see the situation in a completely different light as the details emerged. Brenda, who ran the local general store, was one of the first to speak out. I always thought it was strange, she commented to anyone who would listen. A rich man like Edward Monroe not looking for his missing daughter. It just didn't add up. Marina's recordings were analyzed by experts who confirmed their authenticity. The forged documents she had been forced to sign were also exposed, revealing a pattern of manipulation and psychological abuse that had gone on for years. Bob was in the kitchen making lunch when he heard voices in the yard. He looked out the window and saw something that moved him deeply. Neighbors from the surrounding farms were arriving with casseroles, clothes for Sophia, and even toys donated by their own children. "Bob," called Mr. Henderson, a local farmer. "We brought a few things for the little girl, and we wanted you to know that this whole community has your back." Sophia, who'd been playing with Angel in the yard, ran over to see the gifts. Her eyes lit up when she saw a new doll, almost identical to the one she had left behind at Edward's house. "Is this for me?" she asked shyly. "Of course it is, sweetie," said Mary Henderson, the farmer's wife. And look here, some clothes my granddaughter has outgrown. Marina watched the scene with tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt she wasn't alone in the fight to protect her daughter. Meanwhile, in the city, Edward was discovering that his influence had its limits. His high-priced lawyers were fighting to get him released, but the evidence against him was mounting. Worse, public opinion was turning against him. A local investigative journalist had started digging deeper into Edward's life, uncovering irregularities in his businesses and a history of abusive relationships that stretched back years. The image of the respectable businessman was publicly unraveling. "Mr. Monroe," his lead attorney said during a jail visit, "the situation is complicated. The evidence is substantial, and the media is not on our side." "You're paid to fix this," Edward snarled, "not to give me excuses." "I'm trying, but there's another problem. Your wife." Edward's blood ran cold. "What about Claire? She's filing for divorce, and she's cooperating with the investigation." The revelation hit Edward like a gunshot. Claire, the woman for whom he had tried to eliminate Sophia, was now abandoning him in his greatest hour of need. Back at the farm, Sophia was blossoming in a way Bob could never have imagined. Her mother's presence and the community's support had brought back her cheerful, curious personality. "Bob," she said one afternoon while brushing Angel, "can you be my real dad?" The question caught Bob off guard. He knelt beside her, choosing his words carefully. "Sophia, you already have a wonderful mother who loves you very much, and there's a man out there somewhere who would be very lucky to call you his daughter. But you saved me," Sophia insisted. "You and Angel, you're my family now." Marina, who had overheard the conversation, walked over to them. "Bob," she said softly, "there's something we need to talk about." That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Marina and Bob had a conversation that would change their lives forever. "I know Sophia has grown attached to you," Marina began, "and honestly, so have I. You saved my daughter when I couldn't. You risked everything for a child you didn't even know." "Anyone would have done the same," Bob replied. "No, they wouldn't, and that's why—" Marina hesitated, gathering her courage. "That's why I was wondering if you would consider, if we could, build a family together." Bob looked at her, surprised. "Marina, not as a favor," she clarified quickly, "but as a choice. Sophia needs a father figure, and I need someone I can trust, someone who understands what we've been through." Bob thought of his own daughter, tragically lost, and how caring for Sophia had filled a void in his heart he thought would never be healed. "And Angel?" he asked, trying to lighten the mood. Marina smiled. "Angel is part of the package deal. He saved my daughter. He has a guaranteed spot in any family of ours." As if he had heard them, the white horse appeared at the kitchen window, his large head blocking part of the view. He looked at the two humans and nickered softly, as if giving his approval. "I think we have his blessing," Bob laughed. "So?" Marina asked, holding out her hand. Bob looked at her outstretched hand, thinking about everything that had happened in the past few weeks: an abandoned child, a magical horse, a brave mother, and a community that had rallied to protect a family in the making. "Yes," he said, taking her hand, "let's build a family." Outside, Angel whinnied loudly, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the farm and woke Sophia, who ran to the window and smiled when she saw the three of them, Bob, Marina, and the horse, united under the moonlight. But Edward hadn't given up yet, and his final move would be his most desperate. Edward's release on bail came 2 weeks later, thanks to the tireless efforts of his expensive lawyers and a few political connections that still held sway. But he was a changed man, not by redemption, but by desperation. His company was in crisis, his reputation destroyed, and Claire had taken half of his assets in the divorce, all because of Sophia. In Edward's twisted mind, the girl was still the root of all his problems. If she would just disappear for good, he could rebuild his life. But now she was protected not only by Bob and Marina, but by an entire community that had adopted her cause. Edward knew a direct approach wouldn't work anymore. He had to be smarter, more subtle. That's when he hired Mark Sullivan again, but this time with very specific instructions. "And I want you to find out everything about their property," Edward said during a secret meeting at an isolated diner. "Schedules, routines, weak points, and I want intel on that damn horse too." "Mr. Monroe," Mark hesitated. "After everything that's happened, maybe you should consider other options. Try for a legal settlement." "I don't pay you to think," Edward snarled. "I pay you to do what I say." Meanwhile, at the farm, life had found a sweet, natural rhythm. Bob had taught Sophia to help with simple farm chores, and she had discovered a passion for caring for the animals. Marina had found work as a seamstress in the next town over, but managed to spend most of her time at home with her daughter. Angel, the white horse, had become more than a pet. He was the family's vigilant guardian. Every morning, he would patrol the perimeter of the property, as if checking that everything was secure. Every night, he slept near Sophia's bedroom window. "He's still protecting us," Sophia said one afternoon, as she brushed the horse's silky mane. "He knows there's still danger." Bob, who was mending a nearby fence, stopped his work. "Why do you say that, little one?" "Because he gets restless sometimes. He looks toward the road like he's expecting someone bad to come." Bob frowned. He had also noticed some of Angel's strange behaviors lately. The horse seemed more alert, more tense. Maybe it was just animal instinct, but Bob had learned to trust the horse's extraordinary intuition. It was on a Thursday night that their fears were confirmed. Angel began whinnying frantically around midnight, waking the whole family. Bob got up immediately, grabbing a flashlight and the shotgun he kept for protection. "What is it, boy?" he whispered to the horse, who was clearly agitated. Angel led him to the edge of the property, where Bob saw fresh tracks in the mud. Boot prints, not work shoes. Someone had been scouting the farm during the night. "Marina," he said when he returned to the house, "we need to have a serious talk." They decided they could no longer ignore the threat. Bob contacted Sergeant Miller, who promised to increase patrols in the area, but everyone knew the police couldn't be there 24 hours a day. It was Sophia who suggested the solution. "Why don't we ask the neighbors for help?" she asked at breakfast. "They said they had our backs." Bob and Marina exchanged glances. The girl was right. The rural community had its own codes of protection, and a child in danger was something they all took very seriously. That afternoon, Bob visited all the neighboring farms, explaining the situation. The response was immediate and touching. Mr. Henderson organized a rotating watch, so someone would always be keeping an eye on Bob's property. Mrs. Carmichael offered her home as an emergency safe house. Other neighbors volunteered for night patrols. "Nobody messes with our kids," declared Mr. Peterson, a retired farmer. "If this Edward fella wants trouble, he's going to have to go through all of us." Edward, watching from a distance through binoculars, saw the community's mobilization with growing frustration. His plan to isolate Sophia had failed completely. Now she was more protected than ever. That's when he made the most desperate decision of his life. If he couldn't get to Sophia through subtle means, he would confront the situation directly. One last time. On Friday night, Edward drove to Bob's property alone. He had dismissed Mark Sullivan and decided to act on his own. He was armed and determined to finish what he had started in the forest. But he had completely underestimated the community's vigilance and, most of all, Angel's uncanny instincts. The horse sensed Edward's presence long before he got close to the house. Angel began to whinny in a way Bob had never heard before. It wasn't fear or agitation, it was pure rage. "He's here," Bob said to Marina, checking his shotgun. "Call the sheriff and take Sophia to the cellar." "No," Sophia protested. "Angel needs me." "Sophia, it's dangerous. Angel saved me in the forest," she said with a determination that stunned the adults. "Now it's my turn to help him." Before anyone could stop her, Sophia ran out of the house toward the horse. Bob ran after her but stopped dead when he saw the scene before him. Edward was standing in the middle of the yard, a pistol in his hand, staring at Sophia with an expression that mixed hatred and madness, and between them, magnificent and protective, stood Angel, nostrils flared, muscles tensed, ready to defend his little charge with his own life. "It's over, Sophia," Edward said, his voice shaking. "This time, nothing is going to save you." The moment seemed frozen in time. Edward with his gun raised, Sophia standing beside Angel, Bob just a few yards away, and Marina on the porch with the phone in her hand, already dialing 911. The white horse remained motionless, but everyone could feel the powerful energy radiating from him, like a storm about to break. "Edward," Bob said calmly, keeping his hands visible, "you don't want to do this. Think about what you're doing. Think." Edward laughed bitterly. "I've been thinking for months, thinking about what my life would be like without this complication. But she just keeps coming back to haunt me." Sophia took a step forward, her small hand gently touching Angel's neck. Why do you hate me so much?" she asked, her voice small but brave. "I only ever wanted you to be my real daddy." The girl's words hit Edward like a physical blow. For a moment, his hand trembled and the gun wavered. You don't understand. You ruined everything. My marriage, my business, my reputation." "I didn't do any of that," Sophia said, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted you to love me." Bob saw Edward's hesitation and used it to take a few steps closer. "Edward, look at her. Really look. She's your daughter, your own flesh and blood." "She's a mistake," Edward screamed, but his voice broke. "A mistake that should have been corrected a long time ago." It was then that Angel did something extraordinary. The horse walked slowly toward Edward, not aggressively, but with an imposing presence. His dark eyes locked onto Edward's, and something passed between them, a silent communication that transcended words. Edward looked into the horse's eyes and saw something that shocked him. There was no hatred there, no fear. There was compassion. The very animal he had tried to separate from Sophia, who had witnessed his cruelty, was looking at him with a kind of forgiveness he didn't deserve. "You saved me," Sophia whispered to Angel, but her words were heard by everyone. "You saved me when no one else wanted to, even when my own daddy hurt me." The brutal innocence of Sophia's words broke something inside Edward. For the first time in months, he truly saw what he had done. He had tried to murder a 7-year-old child, his own daughter, a little girl who had done nothing but exist. The gun began to shake in his hand. I didn't want to. It was Claire," she said. "Claire wasn't in the forest," Bob said firmly. "You were the one who pushed her. You were the one who left her to die." Edward looked at Sophia again, truly seeing for the first time the scars she still carried, the way she clung to the horse for protection, the genuine fear in her eyes when she looked at him. "My God," he whispered, the gun falling from his hand. "What have I done? What have I become?" Angel stepped even closer, and Edward reached out a trembling hand to touch the animal's muzzle. The horse allowed the touch, and Edward felt a wave of emotion he had suppressed for months. "You saved her," he whispered to the horse. "You saved her from me." Bob quickly retrieved the gun from the ground, but kept his distance. He could see that something fundamental had shifted in Edward in those moments. "Sophia," Edward said, his voice broken, Can you ever forgive me?" Sophia looked at the man who had tried to kill her, then looked at Angel, as if asking the horse for guidance. Angel lowered his head gently, nudging the girl's shoulder. "Angel says everyone deserves a second chance," Sophia said finally, "but you can't hurt me anymore. Oh, Mommy." Edward fell to his knees, sobbing. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve anything." It was Marina who approached first. "Edward," she said, her voice firm but not unkind, "you can start over, but far away from us. Sophia has a family now, a family that loves and protects her." The sound of approaching sirens echoed through the night air. The police had arrived, alerted by Marina's call. Edward didn't resist as he was handcuffed again. This time, he seemed almost relieved. "Sergeant," Edward said to Miller, "I want to confess. Everything. I want to tell the truth about what I did." As Edward was led away, he looked one last time at Sophia. "Take good care of the horse," he said. "He's a better father to you than I ever was." Sophia gave a small, timid nod, still safe beside Angel and Bob. That night, after all the commotion had died down, the newly formed family gathered in the living room. Sophia sat between Bob and Marina on the sofa, while Angel had his great head in the open window, watching over them with his wise eyes. "Is it really over?" Sophia asked. "It's over," Bob confirmed. "You're safe now." "We're all safe," Marina added, pulling her daughter closer. Sophia looked at Angel. "Thank you for everything, pretty boy, for saving me, for protecting us, for teaching even the bad man that some people can change." The horse nickered softly, a sound that seemed to carry all the wisdom and love in the world. And for the first time since it all began, the family could finally sleep in peace, knowing the nightmare was over and a new life was just beginning. 6 months later, the small farm had transformed into something none of them could have imagined. What had started as a temporary refuge had become a true sanctuary, not just for Sophia, Marina, and Bob, but for other animals in need of special care. The story of the white horse, who saved an abandoned girl, had spread far beyond the rural county. People from distant cities came to visit Angel, some out of curiosity, others bringing injured or abandoned animals, believing the place had something special, something magical about it. Bob had turned part of his property into a small animal sanctuary, with Marina helping with the care and Sophia proving to be a natural assistant, especially with the most frightened and traumatized animals. "She has a gift," remarked Doc Hayes, the local vet, as he watched Sophia calm a rescued horse that had arrived the week before. "The animals trust her immediately." "She learned from the best teacher," Bob replied, watching Angel graze peacefully in the pasture, always keeping a protective eye on Sophia. The girl had grown and strengthened in the past months. Her cough had vanished completely, and her cheeks were rosy with health. But more importantly, she had regained the ability to smile genuinely, to play without fear, to simply be a child. Marina had thrived too. Her work as a seamstress had evolved into her own small business, making custom clothes for people in the region. But her greatest joy was watching Sophia grow up safe and loved. "Bob!" Sophia called out on a sunny afternoon. "Can you teach me how to drive the truck?" Bob laughed. "You're still way too little to drive, princess." "Not drive," she explained patiently. "Just sit on your lap and pretend I'm driving, like you did yesterday when we went to get feed." "Oh, pretend driving," Bob smiled. "That I can teach you?" They climbed into the truck's cab, with Sophia on Bob's lap, her small hands on the big steering wheel. Marina watched them from the porch, her heart full of gratitude for this family that had formed so unexpectedly. Where are we driving to today?" Bob asked. "Everywhere in the world," Sophia answered seriously. "I want to see all the roads, all the places where there are animals that need help." "That's a very beautiful dream," Bob said. "And you know what? Maybe one day we can do that for real. Travel the roads, helping animals." Sophia turned to look at him, her eyes shining. "For real? With Angel too?" "Of course, with Angel too. He's the one who started all this, wasn't he?" Angel, as if hearing the conversation, ambled over to the truck and stuck his head in the open window, his intelligent eyes watching the family with that expression they had all learned to recognize as approval. That night, over a simple but love-filled dinner, Sophia asked a question that took them all by surprise. "Bob, can I call you Dad?" Bob felt his eyes well up. "Are you sure, little one? That's a very important word." "I'm sure," Sophia nodded. "You protected me, you took care of me, you taught me important things. And She hesitated, then continued with the brutal honesty of a child. "You never hurt me, not once. And you, Marina," Sophia turned to her mother, "can you marry him, so we can be a real family forever?" Marina and Bob looked at each other across the table, both smiling. They had talked about it a few times, but always hesitantly, cautiously. "What do you think?" Bob asked gently. "I think I would be honored to marry the man who saved my daughter," Marina answered, her eyes shining with happiness. Sophia clapped her hands with glee, and outside, Angel whinnied as if celebrating with them. A few weeks later, there was a simple wedding on the farm. There were no lavish decorations or important guests, just the community that had supported the family from the beginning. A few rescued animals grazing in the yard, and the local pastor who had insisted on officiating for free. Sophia was the flower girl, wearing a simple dress Marina had sewn especially for the occasion. And Angel, adorned with white ribbons in his mane, was officially declared the special best horse of the ceremony. "Do you promise to love and protect this family?" the pastor asked. "Then continue the work of compassion you have begun." "We promise," Bob and Marina answered together. "And you, Sophia," the pastor turned to the girl, "do you promise to continue being the brave and kind girl who helped bring this family together?" "I promise," Sophia said solemnly, then added, "and Angel promises too." Everyone laughed, and the white horse whinnied loudly, as if truly giving his word. A year later, the family had found their true calling. Bob had sold his old semi-truck and bought a large van converted for transporting injured animals. They traveled the country roads, answering calls for help, rescuing abandoned animals, and taking them for treatment. Sophia had become an expert at calming frightened animals, and Angel often accompanied them on their trips, serving as a sort of ambassador who helped other animals learn to trust humans again. "Look, Dad," Sophia said on one of these trips, pointing to the road stretching out before them. "Our road goes on forever." Bob glanced in the rearview mirror at Angel, who was traveling comfortably in the back of the van, then at Marina beside him, and finally at Sophia, who was watching the landscape with eyes full of hope and determination. "Yes, Princess," he said, "our road goes on forever. And you know why? Why? Because when you have a family that loves each other and a purpose worth fighting for, every road leads home." Sophia smiled and waved at a butterfly fluttering alongside the van, the same species of blue butterfly she had seen on the day it all began in the forest. But now, instead of being a symbol of abandonment, it was a symbol of freedom and hope. Angel nickered softly from the back of the van, and Sophia laughed. "He said he agrees with you, Dad." And as the van continued down the country road, carrying a family united by love and the determination to make a difference, the sun set in the distance, painting the sky in golden hues that promised a tomorrow full of new adventures and new opportunities to spread kindness in the world. The road that had once represented an escape route now symbolized freedom, family, and the ongoing journey toward hope. And the white horse, who had witnessed cruelty, had become the guardian of a second chance, proving that even in the wildest and most dangerous of places, goodness can emerge when brave hearts, be they human or animal, decide to act.